Another tragic, senseless, violent, frightening death of a mentally ill Canadian man by the hands of police. That was just the nephew of 62-year-old Ijaz Chowdhury, a father of four, who was shot and killed by Peel Regional police officers during a wellness check in his own home. His family, and you just saw some of them, are furious. They're bewildered. Why did police gun him down? Now, here are some of the facts. Mr. Chowdhury was, yes, holding a knife when police entered his apartment. But members of Chowdhury's family say he suffered from schizophrenia. He was not a threat to others. He just needed his medication. He was alone. He had made no threats. Why did they burst through the balcony and shoot him? This is the latest in a string of deaths that have ignited calls for law enforcement reform, specifically defunding the police, moving funds given to police departments over to social services. Reallocating that funds, is that really the answer, or could that make police officers less prepared? A special panel is here to discuss that. Sarah Jama is a community organizer with Black Lives Matter and a co-founder of the Disability Justice Network of Ontario. And Calvin Lawrence is a former RCMP and Halifax police officer and author of the book Black Cop on his experience with racism in law enforcement. Welcome to both of you, and I hope you and your loved ones are okay in this time. Sarah, let me just start with you. When you heard about the story about Mr. Chowdhury, given the history of police violence towards people living with disabilities or mental illness, what occurred to you? What were your thoughts?
I was sad. I was frustrated. I definitely wasn't surprised. Canada is a country with a history of criminalizing and harming people with disabilities and institutionalizing them. And we see that replicated and mirrored in the ways in which our police state treats people with disabilities, particularly people of color with disabilities in this province and in this country. I'm thinking about DeAndre Campbell, who called the police for help on himself as he was dealing with a mental health crisis, and then he was also killed. I'm thinking about Solomon Fakiri, a Muslim man with schizophrenia who was waiting for a hospital bed and was instead killed by prison guards. This is a systemic issue that we're dealing with across the country, and this is definitely not a surprise.
Yeah, I just spoke to Solomon Fakiri's brother, Yusuf Fakiri, today. 11 days in the Lindsay Correctional Facility. He was dead at the hands of guards there. Calvin, you're a former RCMP and police officer. When you heard that they'd broken into this man's house, they tased him, and then they shot him dead, what went through your mind?
Well, if he was there by himself in the house, I don't see a reason why you would break in the house if he wasn't setting a fire to the location or he wasn't threatening anybody else. I think what happens in a lot of these shootings, and most shootings, that there's a term that is called officer-imposed jeopardy. What that means is that police officers put themselves in positions where they have to act when they don't really need to go in and solve the problem right away. Take some time to look at that. Now, having said that, from a policing perspective, you have to look at the behavior. This doesn't matter in this individual case, but generally speaking, you have to look at the behavior of the individual once the police are called. And that means if he's running down the hall with a machete, it doesn't really matter whether he has mental problems or doesn't. It means that your life is in danger and you have to act right away. If he's pounding somebody's face in or something, you have to act right away. So, but I think a lot of these cases, you don't have to act right away, and I don't understand why.
Sarah, go ahead, because this is playing into the calls, Sarah, of before, when we say defunding the police, moving funding over to social services so the police don't have to deal with someone with schizophrenia like Mr. Chowdhury.
I want to refer back to the previous point. The problem isn't what people are doing, whether or not they have disabilities or are racialized. Police shouldn't be in situations where they're armed and ready to be militarized, where we're spending, millions of dollars on police tanks and military-grade weapons. It's not the issue that people who need help are calling, and then police don't know what to do when they arrive, and they have to assess individuals' behaviors. The issue is the fact that we spend $1.1 billion on policing in Toronto. Who are we using these weapons for or against? What is the purpose of police officers walking around with military-grade weapons, ready to kill at a moment's notice? In the UK, they're not weaponized in the same way. There are ways for police officers to exist in ways that don't brutalize and kill racialized and Indigenous people, whether or not they're disabled. And I will not stand for disabled people being the scapegoat in this conversation. It's not about each individual officer feeling like they have to assess whether or not somebody is a danger to himself. The problem is the ways in which the police are militarized and get away with their acts of violence. I'm thinking about the McLean's article that just came out that said that the RCMP is being investigated for relationships with a mass serial killer in this country. I'm thinking about the ways in which Rodney Levi was brutalized and Chantel Moore. This goes far beyond police being unsure of themselves when they enter a situation or a household, and way back to this idea that we are funding military-grade weapons and people with the ability to kill at a moment's notice when we should be putting that money into community services and supports.
Okay,
Calvin Lawrence, can you just weigh in? Because a lot of folks will say this case is exactly why we need to defund police, or at least reallocate resources so social services can help police deal with people with mental illnesses.
Okay, there's two topics here. I wouldn't defund the police. What I would do is add more money from the government to bring in what the panel individual here is saying. You don't have to defund the police. All you have to do is look at the individual police officer and what's going on. You could have a terrorist attack here. You could have a major disaster, and the funds wouldn't be there. You're going to have to fund it anyway.
I respectfully disagree, considering the RCMP is literally right now being investigated for relationships with a mass serial killer in our country, and they're dealing with a class action lawsuit around sexual assault. This is violent, and I'm surprised that you would say this, considering that you've had also experiences of racism in the RCMP, in your role, and you had to retire early because of all the vile racist things that you encountered as a police officer. This issue is systemic, and the senior relationships in police departments, whether it's the RCMP or here in Ontario, refuse to acknowledge that this is a systemic issue. It's not on a case-by-case issue, and we need to be able to address this by taking money away from police and putting it into community services.
All right, just last word, Mr. Lawrence, go ahead.
Okay, every case has to be examined on its own merit. You're jumping all over the place. You're not talking. You're talking about racism, and then, let me finish. You're talking about racist behavior. You're talking.
There's
about
no merit. People are dying.
Hold on. Let me just hear Mr. Lawrence. Go ahead.
All right. You're talking about the shooting in Nova Scotia, which is exactly a different topic. You're talking about the funding of police. You're talking about training of police. You're talking about racist behavior.
To systemic violence. We're never going to fix it because people don't want to connect these dots.
Guys, I can't hear you both. I'll just let Mr. Lawrence go ahead.
You have to pick a topic, stick to the topic, and then we can dissect it. And to say that if you're going to generalize, you're going to lose accuracy. So to say that you're surprised that I wrote a book and was a subject of racist discrimination, yes, but I also was a good police officer.
People are dying, and to not connect the dots to systemic racism, to acknowledge that Indigenous people and Black people are being killed by police, and to say that we do not need to defund the police is egregious.
We have to agree.
This is a really important topic. Sarah and Calvin, I'd like to have you both back. I really appreciate the debate on this. I think we got to do this and have a longer conversation, but I very much appreciate both of your take on this. Thank you so much again. We